March 19, 1962, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Rain tapped against the windows of Robert Evans's cramped office at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory. The rhythmic sound normally soothed him, but not tonight. His eyes burned from staring at pages of calculations and engineering schematics spread across his desk. The small lamp cast long shadows across the room as midnight approached. Robert pushed his glasses up and rubbed his eyes. At 34, he'd already established himself as one of America's leading aerospace engineers, specializing in guidance systems for the Gemini program. His work was classified, his security clearance high, and his dedication to America's space program absolute. A photograph sat on his desk. Robert in his Air Force uniform before he transitioned to civilian research. Next to it, a newspaper clipping announced Kennedy's bold promise to put a man on the moon before the decade's end. Robert believed in that vision with every fiber of his being. The phone's sharp ring cut through the quiet. "Evans," he answered, voice gravelly from too much coffee and too little sleep. "Dr. Evans, it's Cooper from security. There's been an incident at the lab. I need you to come down." Robert checked his watch. "At this hour? What happened?" "Better discussed in person, sir." 20 minutes later, Robert stood in the specialized materials laboratory, staring at an open cabinet. Inside, empty spaces marked where experimental heat shield components had been stored, components he had personally designed. "When was the last inventory check?" Robert asked the security officer. "Yesterday afternoon." Cleaning staff noticed the lock damaged during their rounds. FBI agents arrived within the hour. They photographed everything, dusted for prints, and asked endless questions. Robert watched as they bagged a cigarette but found near the rear entrance. "Dr. Evans." A man in a crisp suit approached, extending his hand. "Agent Morris, FBI counterintelligence. We need to talk." In a small conference room, Morris laid it out plainly. "We believe this is Soviet intelligence work. The materials taken are precisely what they need for their own space program." "But who would have known what to take?" Robert asked. "These weren't just random components." Morris's expression darkened. "That's exactly our concern. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for." The investigation that followed turned Robert's life upside down. FBI agents interviewed everyone in his department. Security clearances were temporarily suspended. Research ground to a halt. 3 days after the break-in, Robert returned home exhausted, throwing his keys on the kitchen counter. A letter sat on his table, mail he didn't remember bringing in. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a brief message. "For America's future. Call if you care about your country." Robert stared at it, heart pounding. He should report this immediately. Instead, curiosity gnawed at him. He dialed from a payphone 4 blocks from his apartment. A woman answered on the first ring. "Professor Evans. Walk to Cambridge Common in 30 minutes. Sit on the bench facing the old elm tree. Bring nothing but this slip of paper." The line went dead. Robert knew he should contact the FBI. This was textbook recruitment procedure, exactly what security briefings had warned about. Yet something pulled at him, the chance to understand what was happening, to perhaps help catch whoever had stolen his work. Cambridge Common was quiet that evening. Robert sat on the designated bench, nerves on edge. After 10 minutes, a woman in a navy blue coat approached. "Mind if I sit?" Her voice carried a slight accent, not Russian, something he couldn't place. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair pulled into a severe bun. "You've had a difficult week, Professor. Who are you?" "My name is Lenka Ostrava. I work for people who are concerned about recent events." "The theft from Lincoln Lab," Robert said flatly. "Yes." She settled her handbag on her lap. "What if I told you it wasn't the Soviets who took your materials, Robert studied her. The FBI seems convinced otherwise. They would be. It's the convenient explanation. But it's not the correct one. She paused, eyes scanning the park. Your work is being funneled to private industrial interests. People within your own government are selling America's space research. That's absurd, Robert said. But uncertainty crept into his voice. Is it? You've noticed funding redirected, haven't you? Projects suddenly classified or shut down without explanation. Robert had. Just last month, his proposal for an advanced docking mechanism had been mysteriously shelved despite initial enthusiasm. The space race isn't just about beating the Russians to the moon, Professor. It's about who controls the technologies that emerge from it. Communications, surveillance, weapons. She handed him a small envelope. Look at these, then destroy them. If you want to protect your work, your real work, meet me at the Harvard bookstore, Saturday, 3 o'clock. She left as quietly as she had arrived. In his apartment, Robert opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, his department head, Dr. Hamilton, meeting with a man Robert recognized as an executive from Aerospace Dynamics Corporation, a major defense contractor. Another showed classified documents being passed in what appeared to be a hotel room. Robert spent a sleepless night. By morning, he decided to take the information to the FBI. But when he arrived at the federal building, Agent Morris wasn't available. Instead, he found himself speaking with a senior agent named Clark. Where did you get these? Clark demanded after glancing at the photos. They were left for me anonymously. And you waited until now to bring them in? Suspicion colored Clark's voice. I needed time to think. Clark's questioning grew increasingly hostile, focusing less on the photos and more on Robert himself. By the end of the interview, Robert felt like a suspect rather than a concerned citizen. As he left the building, a car pulled alongside him. The window rolled down to reveal Agent Morris. Get in, Dr. Evans. Quickly. Once inside, Morris drove several blocks before speaking. You've stepped into something dangerous. Those photos you brought in? They've disappeared from evidence already. What? The woman who contacted you, Lenka Ostrava, she's Czech intelligence. But she's not working for the Soviets, at least not directly. Then who? She's part of a Czech intelligence faction trying to establish independence from Moscow. They're playing a dangerous game, cultivating American assets not to undermine us, but to create leverage against their Soviet overlords. Robert's mind raced. Why me? Because your work is valuable to both sides. And because someone inside our program is already compromised. Morris handed him a thin file. Hamilton has been under investigation for months. We think he's selling research to private contractors who then resell watered-down versions to the Soviets at a profit. So what Ostrava told me was partly true? Enough truth to be convincing. That's how good recruitment works. Morris pulled into a parking garage. We need your help, Dr. Evans. We want you to meet with her. The Harvard bookstore bustled with Saturday afternoon customers. Robert browsed the science section, waiting. A tap on his shoulder. Lenka Ostrava smiled at him. You came. I'm glad. They walked to a nearby cafe. Robert, now wired with a recording device, followed the FBI's careful instructions. He expressed concern about his research, asked pointed questions, showed just enough interest to be convincing. Ostrava explained her position. Czech intelligence wanted American space technology, but not to hand it to the Soviets. They wanted to develop their own program, independent from Moscow's control. They believed certain American officials were corrupt, selling out not just to the Soviets but to corporations looking to profit from both sides of the Cold War. We can protect your research, she promised. Ensure it's used as intended. We have evidence of who took your heat shield materials. Help us and we'll help you. The meetings continued over weeks. Robert, constantly briefed by the FBI, walked a tightrope, appearing to gradually succumb to recruitment while gathering information. He learned the Czech operation was called Polaris, an effort to establish technological independence from the Soviet Union while appearing to serve Moscow's interests. In May, Ostrava made her move. "We need the specifications for the Gemini life support systems," she said during a meeting in a motel outside Boston. "The materials taken from your lab were incomplete." Robert hesitated, following his script. "That's highly classified. I'd need guarantees." "Of course. We've prepared a way to protect you." She outlined an elaborate dead drop system using book codes and signal sites around Cambridge. "Small items first. Build trust." The FBI set up the perfect trap. Robert would deliver altered documents through the established dead drop, a hollow space behind a loose brick in the wall behind a particular restaurant. Surveillance teams would track whoever retrieved them. The first exchange went smoothly. Robert left a packet containing altered but convincing-looking schematics. FBI surveillance photographed a man retrieving it 6 hours later, a low-level attaché from the Czech embassy. But on the third exchange, everything unraveled. Robert arrived at the drop site to find police cars and federal agents swarming the area. Agent Morris pulled him aside. "We've been compromised. Ostrava disappeared last night. Her apartment's been cleaned out." "How could they have known?" Morris's face turned grim. "We have a leak. Someone tipped them off about our operation." 2 days later, Robert received a call at his office. Ostrava's voice came through, tense and hurried. "You betrayed us, Professor. Or someone did. It makes little difference now." "Lenka, I don't." "Listen carefully. The people who stole your research aren't who you think. Check project file G17 from last year's funding allocations. The answers are there. Trust no one in your agency." The line went dead. Robert immediately reported the call to Morris, who advised extreme caution. "Don't access any files. This could be a trap to make you appear guilty of espionage." But that night, doubt gnawed at Robert. What if Ostrava was telling the truth? What if the corruption went deeper than Hamilton? He used his security clearance to access the G17 files. What he found stunned him. The project, his project, had been officially canceled due to technical limitations. Yet the budget showed continued funding flowing to a classified offshoot with a different designation, now under the control of a private contractor. Aerospace Dynamics Corporation. The next morning, Robert was called to a meeting with the FBI and Air Force intelligence. He arrived to find Agent Morris looking grave, alongside several men he didn't recognize. "Dr. Evans." One introduced himself as Colonel Warren from Air Force Intelligence. "We understand you accessed restricted files last night." "Yes, I was following a lead from an enemy intelligence operative," Warren interrupted, "after being explicitly instructed not to do so by your FBI handler." The room grew cold. Robert realized he'd walked into an ambush. "Your security clearance is suspended pending investigation," Warren continued. "We have reason to believe you may have been compromised." "That's absurd. I've been working with the FBI to catch Ostrava." Morris wouldn't meet his eyes. Back home, Robert found his apartment had been searched, professionally with almost nothing out of place, but he could tell. His files were slightly misaligned, books not quite as he'd left them. That night, a knock came at his door. Robert approached cautiously, then peered through the peephole to see Agent Morris. "I'm alone," Morris said quietly. Inside, Morris spoke in hushed tones. "The operation's been shut down from above. Orders came from someone with serious influence." "What about Hamilton?" "Cleared of all suspicion, officially." Morris handed Robert a plain envelope. "Unofficially, I believe Ostrava was telling the truth, at least partly. These are photographs my own team took. Hamilton meeting with executives from Aerospace Dynamics and a man we've identified as Viktor Petrov, a known KGB officer. The photos showed the same hotel Robert had seen in Ostrava's evidence. They're selling watered-down versions of your technology to the Soviets while keeping the best innovations for private development. The space race is making certain people very rich, Evans. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow they're going to arrest you for espionage. They need a scapegoat. Morris stood. I have a friend at the Washington Post. If you have evidence, he might help. After Morris left, Robert acted quickly. He compiled everything he had, the photos, his notes, copies of the G17 files, and sealed them in an envelope. He then called a former colleague who now taught at Harvard, asking to use his lab for some personal research. At 2 a.m., Robert microphotographed all his evidence, reducing it to a tiny film the size of a postage stamp, which he hid inside the lining of his watch. The originals he burned. By morning, surveillance teams were openly following him. Robert took a taxi to Logan Airport and bought a ticket to Washington, D.C., knowing they would assume he was heading to the Washington Post. At the gate, he was approached by two men in suits. Dr. Evans, you need to come with us. On what charges? Violation of the Espionage Act. Robert was taken to a federal building in Boston. For hours, he was questioned about his relationship with Lenka Ostrava, his access of classified files, his intentions for traveling to Washington. I'm being framed, Robert insisted. Aerospace Dynamics is selling our technology through Hamilton. I can prove it. His interrogators seemed uninterested in these claims. 3 days into his detention, a new figure entered the interrogation room. A woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and calculating eyes. Dr. Evans, I'm Linda O'Brien, CIA Soviet desk. She dismissed the other interrogators. When they were alone, she spoke softly. We don't have much time. Your Czech contact, Ostrava, was extracted to Vienna yesterday. Before leaving, she reached out to us directly. The CIA? Why? Because she's one of ours, or was until recently. A double agent we recruited in Prague in 1956. She was supposed to be feeding the Czechs misinformation while gathering intelligence for us. Robert struggled to process this. Then why approach me? Why the elaborate recruitment? Because she discovered that certain elements within American intelligence and defense contracting were selling space technology. When she reported it through official channels, she was shut down. So she went rogue, tried to gather evidence on her own. Hamilton and Aerospace Dynamics. O'Brien nodded. Among others, there's a network. They're profiting from both sides of the space race, selling to the Soviets while securing American contracts. Why tell me now? Because you're about to be charged with treason, and we believe you're innocent. More importantly, we need the evidence you've gathered. Robert tapped his watch. It's all here. Microfilm in the lining. O'Brien took the watch. I have a team ready to move on this, but we need to act quickly before these people realize what's happening. Within hours, the charges against Robert were mysteriously dropped. He was released with a warning not to leave the state. 3 days later, the morning papers carried the story. Aerospace executives arrested in espionage scandal. Hamilton was taken into custody along with 4 executives from Aerospace Dynamics. The evidence cited included hotel surveillance photos and financial records showing payments from known Soviet fronts. Robert was approached one final time by Linda O'Brien, meeting at the same bench in Cambridge Common where he'd first met Ostrava. Your name has been kept out of the official records, she said. But we'd like to offer you a position. With the CIA? With NASA, actually. We need people we can trust in the space program. People who understand what's really at stake in the space race. And what is that, exactly? O'Brien gazed across the park. It's not just about planting a flag on the moon, Dr. Evans. It's about who controls the technologies that will shape the next century. Communications, surveillance, defense. The Cold War won't be won with bombs. It'll be won with innovation. 2 weeks later, Robert Evans packed his belongings and moved to Houston, where he joined the Apollo Guidance Systems team. His work would eventually help guide Armstrong and Aldrin to the lunar surface. He never saw Lenka Ostrava again, though in 1968, he received a postcard from Vienna with no message, just a picture of the old elm tree from Cambridge Common. The space race continued, driving innovation on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Technologies developed for space exploration transformed into satellite communications, advanced materials, and computer systems that would eventually reshape the world. Behind the public competition lay a shadow game of espionage, corruption, and courage, where the true heroes often remained in darkness. On July 20, 1969, Robert watched with the rest of the world as Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the lunar surface. In that moment, he understood that the greatest achievement wasn't just reaching the moon. It was preserving the integrity of the journey itself. Years later, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Robert received a package from Prague. Inside was a small lunar module replica with a note. "Some races are worth running honestly. Thank you for helping us remember that. Elo."